Dear friends, colleagues, glory to Ukraine. We start our webinar long-term consequences of Russian abduction of Ukrainian children, and I'd like you to welcome our speakers. This is the head of Civil Liberties and Nobel laureate Oleksandra Matviichuk. So welcome. And Ukraine's Parliamentary Commissioner for Human Rights, Dmytro Lubinets, and also expert from Legal Liberties and Regional Center for Human Rights, Kateryna Rashevska, and also Paul Grod, President of the Ukrainian World Congress, whom I'd like to ask for starting this webinar with his address. Thank you very much, Volodymyr, and dear colleagues, dear friends. I'm very grateful to all of you for this very important event, and special thanks for our honorable speakers for your eagerness to share on this very important topic, and to all the participants of this webinar, because this is a sign of solidarity and responsibility. Today we are going to talk about crime which cannot be justified anything but. So this is about the abduction and relocation of Ukrainian children, which is systematic state policies which is endorsed on the highest possible level. And it's not just about the abduction of kids, it's an attack of Ukrainian nation, attack on a language of historic memory, and this is an attempt to destroy Ukrainian nation by destroying future generations. So this is a crime which should be considered in long-term perspective, because the impact will be very long-lasting if it is not remedied timely. So the aim of this webinar is to come from the understanding to finding a way to deal with it, how to talk about this crime so it impacts on this issue, to have some actions to eradicate it. So Ukrainian diaspora and civil society plays a crucial role in creating of international pressure for returning Ukrainian kids and taking everybody who is responsible for it accountable. And I'd like to emphasize it, because this topic of abduction of Ukrainian kids, it should be very well focused argument for such issues as sport, as culture, and everything. So the state which systematically abducts kids, it's a huge problem. So it's not just about the analysis, but about the tools which we can use today. So with this framework and with this responsibility, I welcome all of you for the discussion which can give us hope. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. President. So today we're going to have 2 rounds of discussion, and each speaker will be asked questions, and you know that you have a possibility to have it in both languages, Ukrainian and English. So you can choose English to hear all the answers to the questions. So let's start with the first round. So why it's not just about a crime as of this day, but it's a very long perspective for future generations. So it's not just an episode, short-lived, but with a long perspective impact on legal field and others, which can determine the strategy today. So the question is to Mrs. Matviichuk. So in international sphere, this is a thing which is quite superficial, but how do we deal with long-term consequences of abduction of Ukrainian kids, and so why should be done in a way? I'd like to mention 2 things. So the first is we have to put it in a bigger picture, because abduction of Ukrainian kids is just a part of genocidal policy which is conducted by Russian Federation, and we are documenting all the implications of it during 12 years on the occupied territories. It is actively destroyed and by local people, journalists, clergy, ecologists, mayors, and they forbid Ukrainian culture and language. They forcibly draft Ukrainian men to Russian army. And when they relocate Ukrainian kids, they find themselves in Russian re-education camps where they are brainwashed. They were told that they are not Ukrainian, they are Russian, and they will be given to Russian foster families who will give them upbringing of Russian kids. And as a lawyer, I know that genocide is a huge crime which is very difficult to prove in international courts because this is genocidal intent. But absolutely, you don't have to be a lawyer to understand a very simple thing. If you want, or partially, to destroy national identity or group, you do not have to kill all the representatives of it. You have to forcibly change their identity, and all the national group will just disappear. That's why kids, they became target, and they became the target of the genocidal policy, because changing the identity of the kids is much more easier, because it goes without saying it's easier. And the second thing which I'd like to recommend, it's not just talking about one category about kids, Ukraine in general, because to my understanding, to my opinion, we forget about such things as 1,600,000 kids who live on the temporarily occupied territories. They go through the erasure of identity. They study with the help of Russian textbooks. And in those textbooks, there is no such country as Ukraine. They go through total militarization, starting from kindergartens, and their parents, they have to sign up to those camps where they march, they put on a military uniform, they learn how to use weapons, and all that being said, we understand that we're not just talking about that legal issue, we are talking about human rights issue, we're talking about a security issue, because it's not just a problem of Ukrainians. 14 years these kids receive a Russian passport, and at 18 years they have totally erased national identity, and they are ready to join ranks of Russian army, and it means that they are going to kill anyone who would Russia send them to. So when we put this problem, not just a legal problem, but the problem with very stark security issue, which has no national borders, it's very important. And for this purpose, we have to talk about a bigger, actually, spectrum of the kids. Well, thank you very much for this. And now the question to Dmytro Lubinets. For the state, abduction is not just a crime, it's just a threat for the democracy and for the entity of integrity of the country. So what implications, possible implications of this can be considered in state policy, and in this regard, the state actually needs the participation of public. Thank you very much for this question, and thank you for organizing this webinar. So, Mr. Paul and Ukrainian diaspora of all the countries of the world, we really need your help. And let me start with very practical cases which you can use in your work during information campaign, which, to my understanding, Ukraine needs right now. So the first thing, when we talk about abduction of Ukrainian kids, we have to speak about things that Russian Federation systematically and with full understanding got prepared for this genocidal policy And a separate element of this this war crime, this is physical deportation and a change of identity of Ukrainian kids. And it started in legal way before 2014, before the full-scale aggression. And such elements as UNARMIA, and also all the legal regulations which were developed by Russian Federation for Russian Ukrainian kids, and possibility to put Ukrainian kids in foster families. It was well done before 2014, and automatically, the only moment the Ukrainian Crimean Peninsula was occupied, the Russians they started deportation of Ukrainian kids, and the first kid, which we actually recorded by our office, Ombudsman office, which was illegally deported and put in foster family by Russia. It was Ukrainian kid from Crimea. It was back in 2015. And after the occupation, partial occupation of Donetsk and Luhansk region, it spread also to both these regions. So when we talk about war crimes, we have to talk about some stages. The first stage is occupation of Ukrainian territory. The second stage is recording, putting on the roster of all the kids, Ukrainian kids, who turned out to be under Russian occupation. Please use this number. It's 1.6 million. So this is a number of Ukrainian kids who physically lived on the territory which was occupied by Russian Federation. After that, they were recorded, all those kids, and they determined for themselves, and we saw that after full-scale invasion. So the categories of these kids, for example, so orphans, those who are deprived of family care. So this was the first category which were physically deported, relocated from temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories to Russian Federation. The next category of Ukrainian kids, so potentially could be placed with Russian foster families. To this category, we believe so the families, so-called families which have social problems, and also they added the category of the families where parents have open anti-Ukrainian stance, who became prisoners of war or civil hostages. So such kids were physically relocated first on the territory of temporarily occupied territory, then they were relocated to the territory of Russian Federation. For this end, Russians massively use so-called humanitarian projects, for example, educational projects, medical projects. They talked about such things that these kids are relocated temporarily just for the vacation to Crimea, for example. After that, they were taken to Russian Federation, and we have recorded facts. They used Republic Belarus for this purpose. And the next step was a total change of documents. All Ukrainian kids on temporarily occupied territories, they had their documents changed. So everyone who had Ukrainian passport had to change it for Russian passport. Or birth certificate, that also was changed for birth certificate, which is of Russian Federation. So it was not just change of data. For example, when the document was issued, which agency issued this document, the place and date of birth was changed. So to my understanding, it was done for the purpose of complicating the procedure for verification of Ukrainian kids. So the next step, it's a mass impact on those kids, so they had to use Russian language during their communication and educational process. So this is like separate element with everywhere in all the schools on temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. They were they delivered textbooks from Russian Federation. They also introduced such lessons like patriotic breeding, speaking to military operation, special military operation veterans, also ceremony of raising the flag, singing a Russian anthem. So it was done for the very fast change of identification of Russian children, so they had to understand that they are Russians. So the next step, so it's militarization, it's total militarization. All Ukrainian children on temporarily occupied territories who were taken to Russian Federation, they were obliged to become of different military use organizations like UN Army, Kids of Caucasus, Orlatas, and others, and they are all brainwashed according to one principle. So they have to be brought up as future Russian soldiers. So please use this figure when we talk about the number of Ukrainian children who are physically in Russian Federation. No one knows for sure, but Russian representatives in public interviews, they announced around 700,000 are physically on a territory of Russian Federation. So for us, it's a matter of principle, because every kid which is physical in territory of Russian Federation, doesn't matter if this kid with parents was relocated, but this is a result of Russian aggression against Ukraine, and according to humanitarian rules, it's a coercion for relocation, and it's very helpful for us. So International Committee of Red Cross, according to Geneva Convention, they prepared a separate explanation which refers to kids, where they mention it doesn't matter whether it's physical coercion by occupational authorities or whether they did that by themselves, they relocated to other country, doesn't matter, it is considered to be as a result of aggressive moves of Russian Federation. So in legal ways we have to demand that we have to acknowledge, to recognize, all the Russian authorities have to recognize these things as genocide and war crimes committed by Russian Federation. So one of the criterion of genocide is a forceful relocation of kids from one ethnic group to the other. That's what have been done, and it is continuing to be done by Russians. And the next figure, which you can also use, it's approximately 20,000 Ukrainian kids which were forcibly relocated or deported. So this is from the official portal Children of War, and now we have a committee which was convened within the Ministry of Justice, and it is conducting a verification of all Ukrainian kids, and this number can be even bigger. And the last figure, which can be changed 1,000 to 900 kids which were returned to Ukraine. So they were evacuated from temporarily occupied, and they were returned from Russian Federation after deportation. As for the return, you understand that we have presidential program Bring Ukrainian Kids Back. So it unites efforts from civil society, international partners, public sector, all are working for one purpose. So to return as many kids as possible. As for the return after kids after deportation, after negotiation, so we have negotiation as for returning this category of children. I will not get into details about some separate countries, but I can talk about this issue, how countries engage in this. But when these countries say they did a lot for returning Ukrainian kids, they didn't do that, and we have to demand from their authorities, from every separate country, the first, to join international coalition of countries as for return of Ukrainian children. The leader is Canada, and as of today we have 46 countries, and four countries are supervisors. We can share the list of countries, and from the others we have to demand join this effort. And the second, on the level of parliaments, governments, to recognize Russian actions as war crimes and genocide. The third is to continue long-term programs of supporting Ukrainian people, Ukrainian state on behalf of your authorities and administrations. And the next one is information campaigns. We need constant focus should be placed on Ukraine, on the issue of deportation of Ukrainian kids. So it is not leaving the headlines. Unfortunately, we lost a lot during the last time. So people getting wary of it, and we have to conduct some separate cases to start information campaigns. We are ready to demonstrate additional arguments and some case studies and about the kids which identities and documents were changed, whom we returned. If you need this information, we are ready to share it with you. And the most important is understanding that what is done by Russians, it is done consciously, systematically, with a long-term idea, even with a very bad feedback for Ukraine. So I'm sure that this conflict, according to Russian Federation, is not going to be finished soon. Not just because someone is influencing or not influencing the Russian Federation, but the Russians are planning their policy in this way. Pay your attention that as for today, and it should be mentioned that as for today, in Ukraine, in special camps for Russian military prisoners of war, there are Ukrainian children who, at the moment of occupation of Donetsk region back in 2014, they were Ukrainian kids, and now they are Russian soldiers. We have surnames of these soldiers. So, unfortunately, they are not ready to speak publicly about that. I mean, these Russian soldiers. But I communicated with the guys who, back in 2014, he was a kid. He was 17 years old. And when I asked him directly why you decided to join Russian army, his answer was, there is no choice. Either you become a Russian soldier or you go to prison as a Ukrainian spy or terrorist or whatever. And this is the main element which we should use, that Russians massively put pressure on Ukrainian kids and civilian population, so they use it as leverage, as an element of conducting military aggression against Ukraine. Thank you very much, and I'm ready to answer your question. Sorry if it took me too long. Well, thank you very much. And now it's a question to Kateryna Rashevska. From the point of view of humanitarian law, what are the long-term impact of abducting Ukrainian kids? For example, the loss of identity, assimilation, disruption of family ties, and the key meaning for judicial qualification of this crime, and what organizations can use or vice versa avoid, so these consequences should be properly considered in future legal cases. Thank you very much for the question. I'd like to start with the issue that today we often hear about international law doesn't work, or international law died altogether. And in this context, it's very difficult to answer the question, because we have to pay attention on all the constituent parts of all elements, and they will help us to give a proper definition to these crimes. I'm totally with my colleagues who mentioned such crimes as war crimes and crimes against humanity, I'd like to start with a rhetorical question. Have you ever thought about efficiency or inefficiency of international law before our kids were abducted and they were indoctrinated into Russian citizens? I believe yes, but as a society we didn't do enough, and unfortunately we did post facto. And this is normal because international law is a law of sunny day. And at the same time, the legitimacy of international law is usually tested on very negative experience. It doesn't stem from some abstract concepts. And today we see that many leaders, the whole scope of leaders, the whole range of leaders, they try to substitute international law with a checklist of some very good principles, the idea of moral issues which do not correspond to universal issues. And the problem is because this inefficiency of international law is usually felt on the very vulnerable categories of civil society during war, and kids is in particular this category. So the problem is also, despite the fact that we live in a world when equality of states was proclaimed and some universal nature of norms was accepted, but we have exceptions, and these exceptions for the United Nations Security Council's members. And now this is like a tool which is very difficult to be used by us to stand up for the rights of Ukrainian kids, not to mention about trying to prevent such crimes. So my colleagues already mentioned about genocide. I'd like to mention also about some universal agreement, which is called. So this is Convention of Prevention of such crimes. And I'd like to know, according to this convention, how many crimes have been prevented by this convention? In Ukrainian context, it didn't work out. I started my address with some theoretical part, intentionally, sorry for that. But we have to understand clearly what Russian Federation is doing. So Russian Federation is trying to find some justification for their crimes. It is about Russian military and high-ranking officials. And for example, so Russian diplomats also within the system of United Nations, so different committees of social, economic and other issues, and especially during their addresses at Security Council of UN. So they usually mention about evacuation. It's saving Ukrainian kids according to humanitarian rule. So this is kind of unique, and Russian Federation doesn't mention international humanitarian law, especially when it refers to occupied territories where it is supposed to adhere to such things. So we can see that whitewashing of Russian top-ranking official, because all the norms which regulate such things as evacuation, because there were no preconditions for relocating kids to Russian Federation, which is the utter measure. So Russia didn't do anything voluntarily in order to unite kids with other family members and return them to the country of their citizenship. So it's a very telling example that even interagency commission, which was supposed to deal with reuniting kids with their families, because Russians try not to use the word of return. So this commission was created during 2 months after criminal court was issued actually. So this commission was created later than and the members of this commission we don't know. And one more example of how Russian Federation is justifying its criminal activity by international law. It's bypassing humanitarian law, and they impose their own citizenship plus drafting into the army. So civil society cannot be drafted, especially on the temporarily occupied territories. But what is imposed due to some regulations issued by Putin. And when we talk about the status of such case, they had no choice how to keep their Ukrainian citizenship. So the state, aggressor state, does not mention it. So one more example is explaining a forceful putting kids to foster families, which is justified by the best interest of the kid. And only Russian Federation in this case determined what is the best for the kid, which actually contradicts to the proper assessment of this process. And you understand that when these kids are put with those foster families, they are brought up by new family members in the Russian church, and it will totally contradict to international law and convention of the rights of kids, because this is the cultural sphere which is absolutely different. So what Russia is doing is following the illegitimacy, and all the words are turned into reality with compliance of those who hear them, and no one is doing anything to help the situation. So Ukraine is trying to find some mechanism of implementing the international law. If we talk about this in simple words, we're trying to draw the attention of international actors through different institutions, through court and quasi-court institutions, and every one of us understands, especially those who are present in the seminar, that Russians are forbidden to put those kids in Russian legal framework. And what kind of crime is it? So deportation is accompanied by the whole range of crimes against children's rights. How can we make them accountable? So what enraged me, because Russian Federation, where all these constituent elements are joined with this, which is of particular intent to destroy Ukraine as a separate state and Ukrainian as a separate ethnic group. So what an answer should be for us? It's a use of mechanisms like sanctions, courts from different organizations like UN, and this should be timely reaction for Russian Federation, which should make a price for Russian Federation too high and unaccepted. Unfortunately, this is what our partner countries are expecting from us. Even legal experts on international levels expect from us. So it's very difficult for me to imagine that when terrorists, which keep these kids like hostages, and now we can have some negotiations with them, and they all the time make new demands and commitments. So Russian Federation behaves like a terrorist state, and we see that intermediary states and some individuals who can be like caretakers, they always face the fact that Russia makes some promises and then it forgets about those promises and to put responsibility on Ukraine. So we have to provide Russia with a list of kids which Russia abducted, but it's a Russian commitment according to humanitarian law, international law. So Ukraine should provide Russia with this list. And then in media we can see information that from orphanage house in Kherson region, the kids were relocated to Russian Federation, and then we see them on the list of the kids which are supposed to be returned to Ukrainian families. So summing up what I have said, I understand that the world we live on these days, and the legal framework is very vulnerable these days. And implementing those norms, it depends on the impulses on the part of those who have the biggest authority. We should not ignore the situation, but we have to react more efficiently, and this efficient reaction is a way of finding new way to put use leverage for putting pressure on the Russian Federation in order to return those abducted kids, to ensure all the guarantees of treatment of kids on the temporarily occupied territories. And to do that, we have to forget about the compromises which are impossible and sometimes immoral. That's why I'd like to focus on that there is no amnesty for war crimes, for crimes against humanity, and genocide should not be put in place. Only inevitability of being taken accountable. And when these kids are mentioned in different agreements, like ceasefire, because there are some principles which, when we talk about all the kids, it should be very detailed, and we have to reconsider the norms of international law and start thinking about how we can strengthen the implementation of these norms, because if we do not do that, unfortunately it will be done instead of us, and I'm not sure that we would be happy with the things which other states will be doing, especially those who use international law just for justification of crimes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kateryna, and now we can shift to the second round. So the instruments, the tools, how we can transform solidarity into systematic pressure. I'd like to mention for those who are listening to us, so you can ask questions, especially after the second round. We will read out aloud several first questions, and then they will be answered. So we have a few minutes, so I suggest that we can answer the questions, but within 5 minutes, please. So the aim of this round is to give the tools for organizations and civil societies that they can use in their actions before 24th of February. And a question to Oleksandra Matviichuk. So media attention and which evidence should keep in focus for long perspective crimes against kids, and which you would like to avoid as bad ones. So thank you very much for the question. But I'd like to tell something which refers to the topic of the second round. I'd like the organizational committee to think about the list of actions or range of actions which can be conducted by Ukrainians in different countries. So this problem should be very vocal, especially with and accompanied with decisions, because otherwise we can fall into the trap when we talk about such crimes, and then we feel empathy, and then it is accompanied by frustration and all the range of emotions, and people are ready to do something, but they do not know what can be done. So we can change the situation even for worse. We leave people in such a status when they wouldn't like to listen about this topic again, because they say, well, we are traumatized, we are frustrated, but I can do nothing about it. Maybe I will just switch off this topic from my agenda. That's why first thing which I would like to recommend is to think about some steps and measures which we would like to call people to join. They can be very concrete, just for very particular situation or in this particular country, but general, universal. It's from my experience, a recommendation which I would like to share. It's to talk about such stories through stories, not just terms of those crimes like genocidal intents, but how Ukrainian kids are struggling. So it's a huge thing, which is true thing, or especially it happens on the temporarily occupied territories, it happens in deportation, for example, some underground book clubs, when kids organize by themselves just to read Ukrainian books in their own language. So the story is how the kids live through this war. and how it becomes their experience. And this is very inspirational, because they say if kids are capable of it, so we adults can do much more. And it's shameful to say that we can do nothing about it. So from time to time, I recall my personal story. I have a friend. He's a journalist she is from some small occupied town in the south of Ukraine. I wouldn't like to call it due to some very well understandable reasons. So she studied under occupation, and the kids start their morning singing Russian anthem, and one kid doesn't sing. And the teacher pays attention to that fact and asks, why don't you think Russian anthem? And the kid answers, I don't know the words. So what is the problem? Says the teacher, go home, learn it by heart, and come back. And the next morning, so this kid is placed in front of the whole class to sing Russian anthem. And this kid starts singing Ще не вмерла Україна. It's Ukrainian anthem. And sorry, it's quite emotional. I just remember when my friend told me that story, I was crying and she was crying. It's very difficult for me to say it, because this story is about the power. It's about kids who are under occupation and they are struggling, and we adults, we cannot stay and doing nothing. So we present when we present stories based on real facts, how Ukrainian kids find possibility to struggle, it's very, very inspirational, because it raises the question, you ask yourself, if kids can do that, and I can do that. Thank you very much, Kateryna Matviichuk, for this very emotional address. And the question to Dmytro Lubinets: if Ukrainian organization, for example, Unity of Ukrainians in France or other communities, want to help to return kids to what is the best way to help from behalf of the state, institutional or informational, and what is in priority? Thank you very much for your question. If we think about France, for example, what they can do in particular, they do, let me put it in different categories. For example, France. This is the country which publicly and openly help Ukraine in diplomatic way, financial, military, by equipment, and France is also a member of a coalition of countries for Ukrainian kids. What can they do additionally for Ukrainian kids is the help to conduct informational campaigns all around the world on those countries which are not members of this coalition, which do not help Ukraine in any way. And in this way, France can convince other countries, so never countries which help Ukraine militarily cannot become like mediator or negotiator for a return of Ukrainian kids. That's why it was mentioned by Oleksandra, which is very good, mentioning that every country is different, and on the stage, let's say, of preparation for such events before 24th of February, you have to understand what country we're dealing with, what we have to do with this country, and are these countries ready to move forward? So this is more general. All the countries can, we can conduct such international campaigns in all the countries, but we need help from Ukrainian communities. It can be side events, it can be meetings, it can be public events. Automatically, you can invite for such events. There is a very good term in English, English, it's decision makers. So categories of people who are influential, who can influence decision making, like goes without saying, president, prime minister, politicians, human rights activists, journalists. So to make that, to make this event very well spread, so you have to understand, if this country is not a member of coalition, their government or their parliament should adopt this decision and to recognize it as a genocide. Please, with the help of Paul, Mr. Grod, I will spread our QR code of our informational materials. Every month we issue informational materials with numbers, with cases of crimes against Ukrainian kids, so you can use this information. And when you talk about general numbers, well, it can touch upon the hearts and minds, but not much. So please use some cases, particular cases. For example, we have a situation when two Ukrainian boys in the city of occupied city of Bryansk were killed by Russian occupants because they decided to fight for Ukraine. So it's Tigran Afghanistan and Mikita Gaghanov. They were just 16 years old, and they managed to make a recording, short video message, and they finished it with "Glory to Ukraine." So it was a conscious choice made by two Ukrainian boys under occupation against Russian occupiers. And when kids made such a decision, they found some inner forces within them. So, and why adults in other countries cannot make such a decision to fight for kids? Let me underline the fact, when we talk about Ukrainian kids, it doesn't mean that we demand return of only Ukrainian kids. We demand for judicial or legal way of a mechanism of how to react to such cases, because today we're dealing with Ukrainian kids deported by Russians, and next day, tomorrow, for example, other actors, other aggressors can deport kids from your countries. So that's why we have to move forward. We have to raise the issue of making all of them accountable, all the perpetrators from Russian Federation for these particular crimes. And it's not just the issue of Ukraine, this is the issue of the future. So make an example of Nuremberg process, when all the perpetrators who committed war crimes were convicted, and it was done for the future. Doesn't matter how much time passed, doesn't matter what status they have now. What is really important for the whole humanity is to condemn them, and we have to demand that Russians have to be subjected to legal condemnation. As for possible variants in information campaigns, if you have a possibility to organize side events on the level of parliaments, governments, we are ready to provide people who know, who speak English, who have first-hand experience in such issues. For example, in Austria recently, and I believe you agree that Austria is a country which doesn't help us a lot, and we have to deal separately with such category of countries. And Anna Paterman organized in Parliament a side event as for the illegal deportation of Ukrainian kids, and we sent their Ukrainian girl who's now 19, and when she was 17, she lived through all these hardships, and she had a possibility to speak up, and it was taken in absolutely different way. One thing, when you hear it from people who know that, who have some experience, but it's absolutely different thing when you hear it from a person who lived through tortures, through militarization, through the pressure of Russian occupational authorities. It's absolutely different way to accept, and we have such people who are ready to speak up publicly, and they are English speaking, and civil hostages, prisoners of war, children. It can be done online. So it's not mandatory that these kids or people are seconded, for example. So we can give you a list of such people who can take active part in it. And political pressure, I call it, it's positive pressure on decision makers in your countries. Demand from them to help return Ukrainian kids, so they can do some actions with tangible results. So the issue of Ukraine becomes so well known for the whole world, but first thing through political activity of Ukrainian communities. When every country and all the politicians, they think by categories of elections, and they all want to take part in your events, in our events. So suggest that, recommend that. We will give you a floor. There will be such a big crowd, but we like to hear some concrete things. What you personally are going to do. Raise this issue. Put that on a parliamentary agenda. Put that for voting. Raise the issue of helping Ukraine militarily, financially, so demand some concrete actions, because the time for emotions have passed. Now time is for some concrete actions, and what we need that every person during such events demands some concrete things, some tangible things from the political authorities in your countries, and suggest them to travel to Ukraine physically. Because their visit to Ukraine, especially in these days when there is 20 degrees below zero and there is no central heating in Kyiv, we have 3,500 of multi-story buildings are without central heating. So it's just plus 2 degrees above Celsius in their apartments. You just imagine that. It's impossible to live. It's impossible. And for them, it's very difficult to understand because they are far away. Just let them come. Recommend them to come. Just at least one representative from political authorities, especially if this country doesn't help Ukraine actively, doesn't raise these issues. We have to demand them to visit Ukraine, Latin America, Africa, and countries of a great south. Some European countries which do not help us like it's 100%. United States, yes, it's country number one. Even if our attitude is not very good to that country, but this is the country which influences the end of this war through the pressure, or unfortunately with putting more pressure on Ukraine. But this is my impression. But they have to put more pressure on the Russian Federation. And we have to provide them with those arguments. And these arguments will be heard when they have huge protests, actions, huge street events, and then the situation will drastically change. And as for today, I'll ask Ukrainian community on this particular day, on 24th of February, to do something even impossible, because our guys on the front lines are doing impossible things. We have to unite all the world to do some even impossible things, because we are not threshold. We are not just on the threshold of some negotiations. We are on the threshold of a huge challenge which we are facing as a state, as a nation. Because on this day we have to be together, to be united, and raise the issue of returning Ukrainian kids and helping Ukrainian state and helping Ukrainian nation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dmytro. And now the question to Kateryna Rashevska. We which legal qualifications of a crime of abduction and forcible relocation of Ukrainian kids are well grounded from the point of view of international law, and which wording which can be used to strengthen the process of returning Ukrainian kids. Thank you very much for your question. I think that partially it has been answered during the first round, and if, with your permission, I'd like to jump back into the discussion, which my colleagues already shared their opinions. And first, I'd like us to have a positive example how to act and coordinated stances, and very painful answer can change the situation, especially referring to preventing and stopping international crimes. So, such example for me personally is apartheid in South Africa. I cannot assume responsibility in saying that situation there is very good and apartheid issue has been solved altogether. But political isolation, which used to be there, and political sanctions and political pressure, altogether with all the special commissions on top level of, especially on the United Nations level, so they did a lot in order to achieve some tolerable level with the human rights situation in that particular state, and that should become an example for us, which will encourage us to move forward and do not fall into frustration and suffering, because it's not it's not topical for our time. What I'd like to share is a very positive example in Ukrainian context. Our organization is dealing a lot, and I believe our partners too, with sanction proposals which are advocated and which target different audiences, especially in European Union, like quasi Union, and on the level of United Kingdom, on level of Canada, Australia, Japan, and thanks to the sanctions we see that on that middle level we can coordinate their behavior in a way we would like to achieve. So when I first mentioned that we do not like political indoctrination, militarization of children, but international law, there is a problem. So if you would like to start implementing on the level International Criminal Court such things, we cannot do that. We tried a lot. So they demand from us to present the issues of kid soldiers, and they say that in Rome statute they do not have such categories, and thanks to such long-term advocacies at the level of European Union, we have separate categories for putting them on sanction list. It's military indoctrination and re-education of abducted Ukrainian kids, including kids on occupied territories. So we succeeded in that, and it was like cooling effect, and it's quite visible, especially on the example of temporarily occupied territories, on the territory of Russian Federation, and what also refers to Belarus, where thousands of Ukrainian kids were relocated. And the next thing which I'd like to draw your attention is, when we talk about some actions, we have to stem from the issue that Ukraine doesn't have a lot of resources like financial, time resources and human resources. So willing or unwilling, we have to prioritize the audiences, states and actions which we'd like to undertake, and mechanism which we also use. To my subjective point of view, the advocacy is shifted to our state partners, and I do not criticize that. I just put it as a fact. And when we talk about the audience we work with abroad, so it's heads of states, parliaments, journalist communities. So in order to keep the topic in focus on the headlines, and especially on the level of our countries, partner countries or non-partner countries, and this is it's visible. I'd like to draw your attention to one aspect. So for me, as a litmus paper, how well we are working, so how kids who have been returned from Russian control, how do they feel, for example, in Ukraine or abroad or from temporarily occupied territories. So those kids, they either go to territory of the European Union or they first go to Ukraine and then they migrate or they go back to Ukraine from other countries. There are a lot of combinations. And I often hear that kids, they feel underheard, they're not accepted well into the Ukrainian community. So I'm just curious why they face such problems. I found the answer to this question because we understand the integration of such kids as a one-lane road. For example, there is a kid, we are family members, we have to integrate back to Ukrainian society, to help them integrate maybe abroad. So, but we have to understand that we as a society have to make a step forward to these kids. It's two-lane road actually. When I was a kid myself, I learned to read at 3 years of age, and my beloved action was to read the signs on the street. It was not just interesting for me to read them aloud, but to understand what they mean. And there is something which is in Ukraine or abroad which will draw attention of our kids, our adolescents, our adults, so they get interested in the fate of such kids of 1.6 million, especially those who live under occupation. And we have to spread this among common people. We are all people, yes, common people, but what I mean, common people, not politicians, not media, but even our compatriots who live abroad. So are there possibilities for abducted kids to learn about such crimes when they suspect that something is going wrong, that they can suffer from it? Are there such possibilities within Ukraine? I don't even mention that there are such possibilities among the countries of the European Union. So it is important for me that we work on different levels, not forgetting about people approach, because human needs human first and foremost. So human integrates into society, not back into institutions. That's why it's very important to achieve the level of spreading knowledge, a level of solidarity, so such processes go smoothly, and such processes, they will find reaction from the kid when kids understand that they are being heard out and understood. And Russian Federation is trying to manipulate a lot such narratives that you are not needed in Ukraine, just look what awaits you there. But in Russian Federation we have good stipends, you can enroll into the higher educational institution without exams, but mostly they do not mention that these are military higher educational institutions, they just mention it. So in order to overcome and dismiss such narratives, we need not only informational campaigns, but actual actions which are aimed at well-being of such kids and their families. And Dmytro mentioned that in the first round of our discussion when Russians attacked on very vulnerable, targeted vulnerable categories. And this vulnerability didn't disappear after full-scale invasion. For example, when the kids were abducted and then they were returned, but the problem persists, and such families should have support from Ukrainian state, and they have to present their evidence and their accounts, what happened to them, what happened to the youngest and the most vulnerable. And it's very important that sometime in history this crime, altogether with other war crimes and other crimes against Ukraine committed by Russian Federation, and during the 8 years before that, should be alongside with the other crimes like artificial famine, like forcible deportation of Tatars and other things. So thank you very much, Kateryna Rashevska. So we are finishing our second round. So I ask you to demonstrate your screen, and let's talk about the actions which will be in advance. So you will have a good understanding of the future events. Do you see that my shared screen? This is a map of Ukrainian World Congress, and the first events have already been registered, and these events are very important to be registered because this is the only world map with all the events around the world, and it will be spread around the media all over the world, also shared with politicians. So you have to understand how important this action is, and that's why we ask every participant to register your event on this world map. It can be done in less than 10 seconds period of time, and it will appear on this world map. This is very important because it shows the scale of such events. I have to remind that we work and we cooperate with office of Mr. Lubinets, and we work with President office, with Oleksandra Matviichuk, with Kateryna Rashevska, with the office of Pope of Rome, and everyone is oriented at this map, and they will look at it, how important and influential, impactful action, and they will see what events will be held in their region. And we also suggest more information about event, how you can engage key statements of this campaign, and the questions we are going to answer. And the statements about the numbers and a piece of advice for organizers, some visual aids. So you have analytical materials. Everything which we are discussing, it can be found here, and as a Ukrainian World Congress, we have already prepared that for you, so you can organize your events in easy way. Now let me switch to a very short question and answer session. After that, I will give the floor to Paul Grod to finalize our conference. Or maybe there are 2-3 questions which are of utter importance. The first one is questions about figures. I don't know who exactly wants to answer this question, but maybe we can have like sum up of the dialogue and give the numbers which our communities should use in their lives. So let me say that I already mentioned several numbers in my first address. It can be in other address. During your presentation, I put attention to one of the folder for use. We will prepare a separate brief on kids to be used by all Ukrainian communities on 24th. So 700,000, 20,000, 1.6 million, and a number of kids when they were returned. So this number is changing periodically. We will update it constantly. We will give you concrete cases and even pictures. We have families who allow us to share pictures of their kids during our events as a demonstration of the fact that this kid was kidnapped or even killed, abducted and killed. So we will make that separate brief, and there is no need to talk a lot about it right now. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Oleksandra, Kateryna, maybe you would like to add something? Okay, let's switch to the next issue. It's from Miss. So the question was, Red Cross organization helps us, and should we mobilize it as well? If, with your permission, every week I have working meetings with Red Cross committee. 2 weeks ago I had a meeting with the president of Red Cross Committee in Geneva, and in parallel there was a delegation from aggressor state, and there the question was raised by about different categories of Ukrainian citizens and verification. So my impression, so International Committee of Red Cross and like other legal organizations, they have a right to receive all the information about Ukrainian citizens and Ukrainian kids from Russian Federation. In real life, they do not have any number. The Russians do not share anything with them, and not only with this organization, but with organization as well. So should they be engaged? To my opinion, yes, because there is no other organization like this. This is the only organization with the mandate of protecting civil rights of citizens, Ukrainian citizens, who suffer from war, from this military conflict, and they should be used, I mean, this organization. And if we expect some practical realization, it won't happen, not in the foreseeable future, because Russians are not going to change their stance. And it refers to other international organizations. I totally agree with Kateryna, who mentioned that there is a kind of impression that international law died, but just pay attention that Russians are very sensitive about some addresses on the level of United Nations and in the sector of civil society. So in any case, we have to engage members of such legal organizations and human rights activist organizations, and we have to ask them, so they ask them to develop some information on legal materials which we will use against Russian Federation, and this surely should be done. This is from my opinion. Thank you. Thank you. And Oleksandra, Kateryna, are you going to add something in this regard? So after Oleksandra Matviichuk address, there were a lot of questions about some concrete stories, pictures of kids. Can that be used? Where can we find this information? Or maybe we should prepare some general pictures without mentioning some concrete names. Well, I don't know such any resource which I can recommend you to read about such stories and take pictures from. We all understand that the issue of using the pictures of kids is very sensitive, so it should be endorsed by both kids and adults. But there are kids who go to European Parliament sessions, who go to participate to other countries, participate in such events, and their pictures are available. And the easiest way for us is to address to Ukraine's Parliamentary Commissioner for Human Rights, to Voices of Children organization, to Children Town, some specialized organizations which are dealing with this issue for many years, and they can have such cases which can be further used, and pictures which can be used. And knowing such organizations, I have no doubt that they adhere to all the norms and regulations which refers to security and for issue of privacy, because there is a golden rule. There's golden rule: if you cannot help, do not harm. Maybe, Kateryna, you also would like to say something, or Dmytro? If I may, some questions need answers on my behalf, and the first which I'd like to answer refers to the term of which pertains to term of deportation, because it migrated from the sphere of legal sphere to the sphere to the field of policy, and sometimes we are asked to change it, like not use deported but abducted. So, okay, let me start with a short, brief lecture on terms. We can use such definitions: unlawful deportation. So this is very topical concept. This thing differs it from a crime against humanity, and that question was raised in questions. So it means that a human being was deported. In our case, it was deported from Ukraine to Russian Federation or Belarus. These are the most often used, and forcibly transferred. This is the next term. It means that the same kind of person was forcibly transferred, but within the borders of one state. For example, between temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, for example, from Mariupol to Donetsk, Shakhtarsk, or from Kherson to occupied Crimean Peninsula to the city of Simferopol. And for these two terms, we have umbrella definition, which is called forcibly displaced. You can use it as a synonym for both these terms. So we can use the word abduction, abducted, because this is one of very serious crimes, which means forceful relocation within the borders of temporarily occupied territories. But what is important is indoctrination. It is done for re-education or brainwashing or indoctrination. What can be used? We cannot use the word kidnapping. We also do not use the word kidnapping. We can use trafficking in person. To some extent, it is justified. But we would like better to avoid this term, because it can be confused with other legal terms. So let's use all the terms which are registered in statutes like Rome statutes. Let's talk about Ethiopia, about states of African Union. How do they treat this topic of abducted Ukrainian kids? This is the field where we didn't do anything. We just use we just dispatch some groups of our experts to African countries. But we understand that even within the state, the stakeholders, we have to conduct advocacy campaign. We have some positive cases. So let's talk about Comoro Islands, Benin and other states. They supported the resolution of returning Ukrainian children, which was voted back in December, back in 2025. It is a huge success for Ukrainian diplomacy of non-governmental sector, for civil society, and as well for Ukrainian diaspora in those countries. You cannot even imagine how proactive these people are. They do unimaginable things in order to draw the attention to this issue. And what is important for me here, we should not compete showing some suffering, especially in the countries where kids are also suffering from their local wars and conflicts. But we have to also learn from African states where it's possible to push international community to engage in more effective work. It's not about competition, it's about solidarity and cooperation and many other steps which we have to make in order to talk about African states which are well aware what is going on in Ukraine, what's happening, and they are ready to help us to struggle for returning our kids back. Thank you very much. and taking Russians accountable. So 1 hour and 2 minutes already. So Oleksandra Lubinets, I will just add some very brief recommendation. So Kateryna Rashevska is a very well experienced in definitions. I would like to ask her to make a short glossary, to develop this glossary. And together with Kateryna, we already had two special reports. They are both in Ukrainian and English languages. And also on our web portals, you can find them. It goes without saying that it was done back in 2023, 2024, I mean, which refers to data, but what refers to principle, to definitions, to system, it can be taken. And kind of short glossary should be developed. And Kateryna can do that. And second issue, so contacts, number of children, and contacts from the family members who actually gave us right to use their personal data, because this is a very sensitive issue and we treat it as a sensitive issue. And we have the list of such families, of such citizens who are ready to share their personal data in order to be used during big events. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. As I already mentioned, 1 hour and 20 minutes we are online. Thank you very much again. And let's finalize our webinar. Maybe Matviichuk, Lubinets or Rashevska are going to wrap it up with then I give the floor to President of Ukrainian World Congress, Paul Grod. Mr. Grod, you're welcome. Thank you, Volodymyr, and I'd like to thank very much to Oleksandra, Dmytro, and Kateryna for very deep insight and for your constant work for future of Ukraine. Your addresses gave us not only analysis but practical tools which should be transformed into concrete actions and bring concrete results. I also thank you, Volodymyr Kogutyak, Vice President, for his leadership, especially on the eve of the full-scale invasion anniversary, and the topic of abduction of Ukrainian kids will be in focus of international events. And today I call on everyone and every participant to take action, organize events, campaigns, work with media and governments, register your events with State with Ukraine, which is also use all the materials on our site, so UkrainianWorldCongress.com, and we have to demand strengthening of support of Ukraine and to recognize Russia as a state of a sponsor of terrorism and take full accountability for the crimes committed against humanity. No normalization in relations with Russia, in economy, in policy, in sport, in any other relations will not start without without returning 1.6 Ukrainian kids, and future of Ukraine is in our hands.
Вирішальна. Тож, до роботи. Дякую вам.